Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be, and welcome to another edition of Unlock the Door Radio, where we seek to challenge conformity, question authority, and basically try to expose our listeners to ideas that might not be part of the whole mainstream culture that we live in today. Now, speaking of mainstream culture, I would encourage people, before we begin tonight's topic, to go to my blog at michaelcross.net and check out the article that I put in a couple weeks ago dealing with how to stand up for individuality and challenge authority. That's at michaelcross.net. Also check out my YouTube station at, Michael Cross on YouTube, and see a lot of our previous shows that we have done here on this program. Now, tonight, what I would like to do is go into a topic that I think is quite interesting because, we've dealt a lot with psychopaths and things like that. But essentially, I'd like to broaden it slightly and deal with the subject of why do people like the villains? And also, why do women go for the bad guys? Now, if you're a guy, you may have asked that question yourself. Why is it that the nice guys just seem to be the ones that the gals want to go out with and go shopping with, or bake a cake with, or sit and tell their problems to, but not actually try to form a relationship with? And then also, if you're a woman, you might wonder why it is that you seem to be drawn to guys that have this kind of dark part of their personality. Well, I'd like to offer some insights on that. So let's just go ahead and begin. Now, I was looking over some articles here, and I ran across one in the Telegraph, the UK Telegraph. Why is it that the British newspapers and publications seem to be so much better than the American ones? I do not know, but hey, maybe you guys got to take a look at the corporations that own most of the mainstream press today in the United States. Well, anyway, I found this article that was published last year, and it's by Carolyn Kent, and it's called "Why Women Can't Resist Bad Boys." And I just want to deal with this a little bit here, where she says, quote, "There is something about bad boys that we find incredibly appealing, even though we often regret the experience afterwards." And then she goes on to say, and one thing that bad boys are not is boring. Now, this reminds me, actually, it's kind of interesting. This reminds me of my interview with Emmy Thomas a couple weeks back, in which she's a diagnosed sociopath. And one of the things she pointed out when it comes to sex and sexuality and relationships is that psychopaths, for instance, and sociopaths, now they're not the only bad boy, not every bad boy, for instance, is a sociopath or psychopath, but obviously that they would more often than not qualify in, that category themselves. One thing she pointed out is that they're not boring. They're always looking for excitement, adventure, trying new things. And you know what? In such a dull, conformist, glittery society that is Western culture today, that must be appealing when you find someone that isn't part of the matrix. Now, it doesn't mean everyone's not part of the matrix is the good guy. It means that many of them actually aren't. But the thing is, they're not boring, okay? The sociopath or psychopath is not going to be a boring person because they hate to be bored themselves. So that segment of the bad boys are not going to be boring, and I'm sure there's many other ones who are not diagnosed or would qualify as sociopaths or psychopaths are also not boring. But anyway, she says this. One thing that bad boys are not is boring. We are enraptured by their spontaneity, by the excitement and anticipation of being with them, at least until we get hurt. And that's one thing that you can count on with a bad boy. Now, the thing is, I'm going to leave that article behind there. The thing is that human beings seem to be drawn to the psychopath. They seem to be drawn to the person who's the villain on whether it's a TV series, a movie, cartoon, whatever. The villain always has an appeal that seems to overshadow the good guy. Now we can take a look at examples throughout much of our fictional literature today. I think the best example is Darth Vader. Come on, Darth Vader is a much more complex and interesting character than Luke Skywalker. Now, we know that Darth Vader is a bad guy, but there's something we want to know about him. There's something that seems to carry a complexity that goes beyond the normal hero in a series. And in reference to that, we have Carl Jung, the psychologist, who said that the darker energies of our subconscious are what he would consider the shadow. Freud called them the id, Jung called it the shadow. And the shadow is where our creativity and spontaneity and so forth comes from. And you know what? Most people learn to repress that. Most people feel guilty if they were to even entertain that they have these dark thoughts. And maybe, I asked some people about this, maybe the reason why we seem to like the villain is because they're doing the things that we sort of wish that we could do, but we don't, because that wouldn't be what a good boy or good girl does. Maybe that explains why during the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal during the Clinton years, that Clinton's popularity went up with women when it was found out that he had the affair with Monica Lewinsky. Now, why is that? Why would women find that to be alluring? Well, for one thing, it made the president, who traditionally had been a symbol of virtuousness and almost superhuman or non-human virtue and strength and so forth, a symbol, almost as much a symbol of America as the bald eagle. It made him suddenly into the bad boy, which meant that you fused the power and prestige of his office with kind of this bad boy image. And that is appealing to women. I'm going to get into why that is in just a minute. Why is it that so many people, a lot of women find Vladimir Putin to be so, kind of the same thing, although we don't know much about his personal life. We do see these pictures where he's out there, in Siberia, with his shirt off, riding a horse, shooting a gun, doing those kinds of things. And that kind of gives off a bad boy image. Okay, because most guys, you wouldn't expect to see, the guy who's that guy that claims to be the leader of the House Republicans, Bonnier, or whatever, you wouldn't expect to see someone like him doing that. He couldn't pull it off. He would look ridiculous out there trying to ride a horse in Siberia with, like that. And so it works for some guys, and for Putin it works. Okay, he's kind of this kind of image, just like Bill Clinton, for different reasons, but still doing the things you just don't expect a leader to do. And I think ultimately Jung's analysis of the shadow is that we all possess it, we are attracted by it, but most of us are scared to death to show it, which may explain why we are so attracted to dark literature, dark movies, and that sort of thing. Whereas, if you ask a person, oh, what kind of films do you like? Oh, I like nice romantic shows and things like that. And they secretly turn on The Walking Dead. and watch that. And who are the speaking of that film, I love that film. I've mentioned it, that series, several times here on my show. Who are the people that are looked up to in that? It's not the weaker men. It is the strong ones. It is the character, like, for instance, Daryl. And, what? He's presented as being kind of a bad guy in this first of the series, but he uses violence. He is very much kind of that redneck. You don't get an idea that he's a very educated person, but he has the strength to survive in this dystopian post-apocalyptic world. And so that's an appeal. I've seen surveys that have shown that women love that character. Okay? They don't like, if you threw in a character on that show, a nice, well-mannered, proper acting individual, I think people would be just like, when is he going to get eaten by the zombies? Please let him get eaten by the zombies. So ultimately, I think what it is we really admire these traits. And maybe it has something to do with our past, when we were out there fighting in the jungle or on the savannah or in the mountains of Germany or, the taiga of Siberia. It was a real advantage for a man to be someone who had strength, not some metrosexual guy who could get in touch with his feelings and go shopping with you at the dress shop and be really happy doing it. Okay? It was a man who could face danger, who could fight and compete and do all those kinds of things. And I think it's hardwired in us as males to kind of see that kind of guy as a leader, and as females to see that kind of guy as good breeding stock, essentially, because his children will ultimately be strong too. And there have been studies that have shown that if you show pictures of men to women when they are on their menstrual cycle, when they are the least likely to be able to get pregnant, they will identify men who are kind of metrosexual, the nurturing, caring kind of guy who doesn't look threatening or anything. They will tend to see him as very attractive during that time period. But you go 2 weeks later, when they're ovulating, all of a sudden he's not so attractive. They start choosing the guy that has the looks that would convey toughness and strength and endurance and so forth. So ultimately, it could be that the woman wants that kind of male for reproduction because that kind of guy is the kind of guy who survives. His children would be stronger and so forth. Now, of course, the birth control pill messes that up because it messes up ovulation. So there have been people that have speculated the reason why the 1950s leading men were all kind of the macho guy, and in the nowadays the leading men are often kind of the metro kind of guy, is because the birth control pill keeps women kind of still wanting Mr. Nurturer rather than Mr. Fighter. Now, the thing is, if they go off birth control, then they start, again, going into the idea of what seems to be most attractive is the fighter. Now, I'm not saying that all women go for the guy who has big muscles and a big chin and so forth. There are different things. And I will say this, there are people who display what's called the dark triad, which I'll explain in just a moment, who really don't have those kinds of characteristics. I mean, going back to Vladimir Putin, I mean, he's short. I think he's like 5'2", so he's not very big. He's skinny. He doesn't have that kind of facial feature that would be all that menacing, but yet he still displays those kind of characteristics that could fall into the dark triad. So it's not necessarily that a guy has to look like a caveman in order to get that same attraction. But there are personality traits that can show that as well. Now, I ran across this really interesting article in Psychology Today. Again, this was about a year ago that this was published. It's under the title, if you want to look it up for yourselves, I always encourage, come on, I say we should question authority. Question me too, I don't care. I always tell my students that, don't take my word for something. If I'm going over some sort of topic like evolutionary psychology or so forth, please question me. I don't want you just taking notes and thinking that when you do a term paper or something that if you quote me in there that I'm just going to give you an A+. That's not the case. I want you to question. But anyway, look on Google, Head Games, What Freud Never Knew, by Vinita Mehta. Its last name is spelled Mehta. And the title of the article itself is, Why Do Women Fall for Bad Boys? Why do the wrong men feel so right? A new study offers some answers. And again, that was published in October of 2013. Now, the thing is, a guy did some studies. He led some studies, a guy named Gregory Carter of the University of Durham. And I think it might actually show some very interesting results. Now, before we get into the study itself, we have some writing here that goes into why perhaps women go for the bad guys. Then I'll get to the study that he did later. Now, the thing is, what she says here in her article is that research has tended to show that the dark triad. Now, these are the dark triad refers to people who rank high in narcissism, which is usually associated with self-love, kind of a sense of I'm the best one here. Okay, those kinds of people. Of course, going back to the Greek mythology of the guy who looks in the water and sees his reflection and falls in love. I've seen some pictures too people have put out there on the internet showing Obama kissing a reflection of himself. Okay, and I think that a lot of people have accused Obama of being a malignant narcissist. And I'm not going to offer judgment. I've had some experts on here talk about it. If you go to, again, the YouTube station I have, Michael Cross, there's a discussion there by Sam Vachman in an interview I did some time back, in which he goes into that narcissism is actually quite dangerous. It's more dangerous than psychopathy, perhaps. At least that's the impression I got from listening to his answers. But narcissism and then psychopathy, which of course we've gone over those various traits. You can look that up on the internet. The Hare psychopathic traits. There's tests you can take that show whether you have psychopathy or not. So, you can just do that on your own. And then Machiavellianism. Now, Machiavelli, I'm going to do a show on him in the near future. Machiavellianism seems to be our new foreign policy. And it's kind of in a sense, it can be summed up as do what you need to do to win. Okay? Machiavellianism can be nice, if that will get you what you want, or be ruthless, if that will get you what you want. And ultimately, the end justifies the means, and what benefits, whatever your intended source of benefits, whether it's yourself or your society, then that's what's good. And it's based solely on that way of thinking. Now, and I think you actually, I'm not sure, but I think you can find Machiavelli's work, the prints, online. But go ahead and check it out there. Again, I'm going to do a show on Machiavelli soon. Now, the big thing about narcissists is they do believe in themselves. And I've heard some of these pickup artists say that the way that you can really, really, really score good, if you're a guy, when you go into a room that has women in it, is to go in there with the belief that you're 10 feet tall. Now, that belief will then enable you to convey that energy to the women in the room, and they will find you to be authentically 10 feet tall, in the psychological sense. So therefore, the Machiavellians believe in themselves. And so if that gets conveyed as a willingness to compete, a willingness to win at all cost, then women are going to find that attractive. And if you have that sense and you're a man, you're not going to be the pushover. You're not going to be like, well, maybe I'm not the right guy for her. Maybe maybe my friend here who also has a crush on her, maybe it's better that he gets together with her. A person who has kind of a psychopathic sense of themselves is never going to do that. They're in something to win. And if they give up on an opportunity, it's because they don't want the opportunity. The next one, specifically psychopathy, is, and they differ from narcissist. The narcissist is usually not quite as clever and goal-oriented as a psychopath would be. But a psychopath is going to be someone who is more focused, but also maybe a little bit more towards the wanting excitement. And basically, everything is about themselves and achieving goals and winning, even if it means crushing their opponents. And, nowadays, that means this person's probably going to use charm. I mean, we're not in an era where you can just go and, grab someone and just carry them off, and they have to be your wife after that. The charm game. And a psychopath knows how to charm. They can read people really well. They can read emotions. And while they may not feel emotions for the most part, they can read them. And that's a real advantage in the game of mating, for instance. Then, of course, like I said, with Machiavellianism, you just do what you have to do. So that's the dark triad. Now, what they did, what Carter did, was he gave various personality inventories, essentially descriptions of two types of male characters, dark triads and controls. And the dark triad was they tried to make them, have those kinds of traits that you would associate with what I've just described. And in the other, you had, let's see here, just checking. And the others were more, kind of not having those traits. I was trying to find a way to read that there that would make a lot of sense. But essentially, just try to, more of a guy that might be just a regular everyday Joe. And what they found was that what he found was that the male quality seemed to be higher for the guys with the dark triad, and that women tended to like that. They, for instance, here it says they demonstrate confidence. Maybe it's because they demonstrate confidence, stubbornness, and risk-taking tendencies. And so, or maybe they just were better since these guys, it was a self-inventory. They were writing down things about themselves. They were able to sell themselves better, whether it be really explicitly or just kind of not so explicitly, but still be able to get the point across. And that can go for a job interview too. There's some people that will go in and they will say what they need to say in order to impress the boss. And they size up the boss in a microsecond. And you got to remember, we form our opinions of a human being when we see them within 8 seconds of when we first meet them. 8 seconds. We have sized them up, and there's some research that says it's like within 1 second. We take a snapshot, we know who they are. And there's an advantage to that. There's a huge advantage if you're out in the wilds of China and you have a choice between you see a regular bear or you see a panda bear. Okay? I mean, to be able to size up which one's going to come after you and which one's just going to sit there and munch on the bamboo. So human beings, it's the same way. We need to size up a situation really, really fast. If you're walking down a dark alley and suddenly several guys come up from behind, they're like you don't know whether they're going to pass you or they're going to grab you, but you turn around and you suddenly notice that they're carrying they may even have hoods on and stuff like that, but they happen to be carrying not briefcases, but packs emblazoned with the local college emblem on them. Then in your mind, you suddenly you will equate those like, okay, those are students, and most of the time they'll just walk right on by. They can be big and menacing looking, but if you just figure, okay, they're students, they go by. If on the other hand that you turn around and you see they have gang stuff, on their clothes or something like that, you're going to be worried. You're going to, try to find, the fight or flight syndrome goes in, do I have a weapon? Should I run? And so forth. And a lot of times it's correct. A lot of times it's not. I mean, a lot of the serial killers, they dress nice and look very non-menacing. And then, of course, you don't realize till the very end that that person was conveying a false image. But still, this is how the mind works. Now, the thing is, I only want to deal a little bit here with the relationships because, well, that's what people are usually interested in more than other relationships. But relationships go much deeper than that, and they can go into politics. You see, the thing is that when we're looking for a president, a prime minister, premier, whatever it is, we're looking for someone that has a father symbol, similar to what Freud talks about in his famous book, Civilization and Its Discontents. We can project images of fatherhood and also strength onto the leader. And while we may have our leaders dressed up, unless it's Putin, he doesn't have a shirt sometimes, but if we have our leaders dressed up in suits and ties, then it's not the same as in the old days where maybe you wore some really menacing clothes. You might have some bones sewn in or around them or so forth just to scare your opponents. But the thing is that we're still looking for strength. We're still looking for that tribal leader who will protect the tribe. And that ultimately is the reason why we elect people who show some strength. I have to say this, I really do. I remember that Obama, when he was running against Romney, he used a lot of metaphors that were kind of strength, sounding like, hey, we're going to go into battle here and so forth. And Romney was kind of like, well, I'm the best guy and so forth. Come on, that's the way he came across to me. Romney came across as a nice, polite, country club type guy who probably was more comfortable out playing golf, even though Obama's a golf guy. He seems to be always out there playing golf. But the thing is, what's important is not substance, but it's image. Sorry, that's just the way it is. We don't buy products usually on the quality anymore. We buy them based on image. And the thing is that the image that Obama presented was more of a leader, dynamic, strong, than Romney did. Because you know what? When Romney actually seemed like he was getting angry at Obama in one of those debates, I can't remember if it was the first or second one, and Obama looked scared, Romney's popularity soared. But then he kind of pulled back, kind of like, okay, I'm going to win this, so I don't really need to go all, gang fight on this guy. And that's when he lost. The thing is, we want leaders who show strength. You get someone up there who looks like the hippie teacher from Beavis and Butthead talking about love and peace and all that kind of stuff, you're not going to get elected. Okay, such a guy will never make it as president of the United States. He might make it in one of these little European countries where they're not worried about war or something, or they're figuring, wow, America will save us if anything ever goes wrong. Those countries, they may look for someone that is more that nurturing type of person. I don't know. But when it comes to power in, a country like Russia or the United States, you're looking for someone who can use the power, who's not afraid of it. And that's very, very important. Now, we also go into the idea that go into scandals and stuff. When a politician immediately is caught doing something bad and he or she just apologizes, I'm sorry, that shows weakness. A true leader is someone who stands up for what they do. And Clinton, some people say Bill Clinton should have just gotten up and really apologized to his wife and so forth. And in a sense he did, but not in a kind of, Jimmy Swaggart, I have sinned type of thing when he got caught. Okay, I think if Jimmy Swaggart would have handled that a little differently, things would have gone better for him. Maybe, still kind of saying what I did was wrong, but not really just, showing like a defeat. And that reminds me of something I hadn't even thought of. There's these pictures of Bonnier in which he looks like he's all emotional. And those just fly all over the internet. And the irony is they're actually posted by Republicans most of the time, because you get the idea that the leadership of the Republican Party, even though they just won a huge victory running on an anti-Obama platform, are all of a sudden, everyone's scared that they're just going to go ahead and cave in and compromise and even give in to Obama on everything he wants. Republicans, you do that, you're going to lose, and you're going to lose big in 2016. Because people put you in there because they wanted you to win. Okay? They weren't putting in they didn't want a bunch of cream puffs going in there that are going to be like, let's all, hold hands and sing Kumbaya around the campfire and cooperate. That's not what they wanted. They wanted you to go in there. They want you to brawl. They want you to stand up for the principles that you said you would stand up for. So ultimately, you better do it. Okay, just a word to the Republicans, because it's better to have a bad boy who might come across bad, like a Newt Gingrich, kind of the bulldog, Irish fighter type of guy, who a lot of people didn't like his politics, but they still respected him. Or a Tip O'Neill. He was a fighter, from the Democrats back in the 1980s. He cooperated when he needed to, but he ultimately was a fighter. And that is what you want. Okay, so Mr. Bonnier, please don't just give in and be all Mr. Nice Guy. Because if you do, you're not going to be the majority leader in 2016 anymore. Because your party won't be the majority in the House anymore. Now, if we deal with these kinds of issues, then ultimately the question comes in, how can this affect actually ultimately civilization, if this is what we're looking for? And Freud dealt with that in Civilization and Its Discontents, because he points out that civilization is trying to keep us under control. Because Freud had that kind of Hobbesian sense that if people let their inhibitions out, that things would just fall apart. The world would come to an end or something. People would be just out in the streets having orgies and killing each other and so forth. Reminds me of that. There was a Star Trek, for those of you who watched the original series, in which they land on this planet that this computer has control of. Oh man, it's starting to sound like the future for the Earth. But the computer has control of this like town where they dress up like in like the maybe late 1800s. And at a certain part of the day, because these people have built up so much repression, the computer allows them to kind of let loose. And they let loose, and you kind of, for that 1960s, you still get the image that everything's going on out there in the streets. And then when the morning comes and, there's this ringing of a bell or something, if I remember it right, all of a sudden people get good again. They're like, oh, yeah, well, now it's time to be nice and call each other brother and sister and all this kind of stuff. The thing is, that was about the most Freudian Star Trek. Well, there's a lot of others too, but that in my mind, that's like one of the most Freudian Star Treks. But it really gets into the whole civilization and its discontents. The idea that we still want to do things, but we will repress them. Now, the reason I said this could be the future is I've read some pretty scary stuff that maybe in the future people will be able to be modified in such a way that they won't have negative, mean emotions. You'll be able to use microchips and stuff that will cause everyone to basically just be going around like, oh, brother Jones and sister Sanchez and stuff, and everyone will be, really nice to each other and so forth. Ultimately, though, that would get rid of our free will, which I think would be worse. Ultimately, I think the trade-off would be far worse. But the thing is that Freud said in Civilization and Its Discontents that guilt is what keeps us under control. That guilt is the price we pay to be civilized people. And so we don't want a very large part of our population that has no guilt. But the irony is then vicariously we can live through those other people. And so even though he doesn't say this explicitly in his work, it is ultimately true, probably, at least in my theorizing here, that the people that have these traits do tend to get our attention. And maybe even beyond the whole reproduction thing, which I've dealt with already, the whole survival thing, it has an appeal because it touches us, because that's the way we do feel too. And going back to what I said about why we identify with the villain is doing what he or she would do, what we would want to do if given the chance. That's why the vampire is such an important form of entertainment. Now, vampires have been kind of thrown out by zombies, but still, vampires will endure longer than zombies when it comes to our fiction, because the vampire is the embodiment of the shadow or the id, the Freudian id, in which the vampire just, sees someone he or she wants, and he or she takes them. And, ultimately, no matter what the vampire movie is, even if it's just a bite on the neck, ultimately you kind of know that it goes beyond a bite on the neck. Okay? I mean, you know what the context is. It's a sexual context. And, someone's watching this and it they connect to it. And so we're drawn to this kind of stuff because it perhaps is touching on our base instincts that society has told us that we're supposed to suppress, that it's not what a proper person does. We need to have manners. We need to be nice to one another. We need to do this and this and this and this rule and that rule and whatever, but at the same time, we crave the ability to be able to do what we would like to do on our own. And some people escape into a fantasy life, but then some people are told, well, no, you're not supposed to have a fantasy life because it goes against the Bible. Personally, I have never seen the word fantasy in the Bible, and I've not seen the word fantasy that does not appear in the Bible ever condemned. But some people think it's bad. Probably the same people that think watching The Wizard of Oz is in some way some sort of celebration of Satan or something like that. But ultimately, what really is important in this kind of analysis is that human beings they have to, for civilization, neuter a lot of these drives, but that popular entertainment allows the drives to come out. The danger, of course, would be if the popular entertainment, for instance, music videos that might encourage people to do violent things. That could be taken as a message that says, go ahead and do it. And that could be dangerous. It might not have the same cathartic value to it that maybe watching a horror movie might allow someone to kind of get rid of some of those urges. And by the way, I've noticed a lot of people that really love horror movies are the really quiet, nice types of people. Okay, it's kind of interesting. That's just an observation. So ultimately, are we attracted to the dark triad? Are we attracted to the politician, the boy, even the girl who's the bad person? Are we? Is it part of not just our literature, but also our real life? Is this ultimately? Are we doomed to forever choose these people to rule over us, and then to give us permission to do bad? Like, when we're told we must go to war, and suddenly it's fun to watch things blow up on the TV screen. It's like a video game. It's like playing a video game in which, look at Baghdad, boom, boom, boom. And most people don't think to themselves, wait a minute. Every one of those explosions probably means there's people getting blown up. Yeah, when you're watching that shock and awe of Baghdad, you're watching people get blown up. But we had permission because we're at war. So we have permission to do bad things. And we put medals on people who go in and accomplish their goals, so to speak. That's society saying it's good in that case, but if you do it when you don't get permission, then you go to jail or get executed. But ultimately, I think the answer is that we will always be in this struggle between the part of our minds that want to do what we want to do and hate to be told no or restricted, and the part that says, if we did do everything we want to do, it would create chaos and might not be the world we really want to live in ultimately. I guess maybe in the future we'll be able to, in some sense, hook yourself up to a virtual reality program and you'll be able to create your own little world. It'll feel like you're in that world. It might even look like it. You might even have a hard time telling when and where reality ends and your virtual world begins. But ultimately, that's going to be really interesting to see how people react. I don't think it's going to be like on Star Trek, not the Star Trek of the 60s. I actually like that one way better than the 80s one, where, what they had the holodeck and they go in there and it's kind of like, oh, let's do a Shakespearean play. That would be really cool. You know exactly what human beings would be doing if they had such a holodeck. It'd be like some sort of hedonistic Roman orgy type thing that people would go in for. It would not be, oh, today we are going to do Macbeth or something like that. When we do get to this virtual reality, that's going to be what most scientists say we will have, that we'll be able to hook up in some way to our brains. I think that could really be telling what people will create, what kind of world they would like to escape into. And that's going to create a whole new dimension of psychology. But until that day, I think we're going to continue electing the bad boys. Okay, we're going to continue electing the people with the dark triad to our political offices. They're going to continue being our bosses, our leaders. They're going to continue being the stars that we look up to the most. And the thing is, ultimately, what we have to do then is maybe at least try to find the ones who stand up for the principles that we want. And again, I've talked to people who diagnose sociopaths, psychopaths. They all have principles and codes that they do live by. It's not like they're just running around doing all kinds of horrible things. If they did, they'd be in jail. The intelligent ones learn how to channel it to get better things. Okay, isn't it much better to be in a position of being a boss and making a lot of money than it is to go steal it? So, you've got to find the ones who actually do have the same morals and values that you support. And that being said, you should at least not get totally disappointed. Like, the lady from the first article, when she's saying it's going to turn out bad. You can't be totally disappointed when the guy or girl that you elect, kind of goes back on what you want. What you have to do is you have to keep the pressure on them. Make sure that when they do wrong, when they do start taking advantage of the position they have, that you're able to then mobilize and basically say, no, we won't take it. And that is one thing psychopaths do, and bad guys too, do recognize, is that the threat of losing out on privilege and power will motivate them because they're scared of losing it. Okay? They're scared of losing it. So you've got to keep that pressure on them. Anyway, I hope this has been enlightening in some ways to you this evening. And whether you're you're one of the bad boys or bad girls, or whether you're the really nice guy and really nice girl, there's things that you can learn here. And, well, that should conclude our show. Thank you for tuning in. And again, I encourage you to go to my YouTube channel at Michael Cross. There's several Michael Crosses, but you'll see the one there dealing with these things. And take care. Bye now.